Mom and I were at home watching television, and you knew something great was coming out of this.
What happens when the most shocking chapter of rock and roll's wild history refuses to stay buried? This is not just a tale of fame gone wrong. It's a story that rewrote the rules of scandal, loyalty, and survival. For decades, fans speculated, whispered, and wondered, what really happened behind those closed doors? Now, after years of silence, Jerry Lee Lewis's infamous child bride breaks that silence with truths that left even her fiercest critics stunned. You think you know the story? Think again? One revelation, kept hidden for years, changed everything. What drove her to finally speak out, and what secret turned their world upside down? Stay with us. You're about to find out. The day innocence was lost. Jerry Lee Lewis first entered Myra Gale Brown's life not as a rock and roll icon, but as a familiar figure within her family. Myra was only 5 years old when her cousin Jerry Lee came to live with them in Memphis, Tennessee. Her father, J.W. Brown, had invited Lewis to join their household as he pursued his dream of becoming a music star. At that time, no one could have imagined how this arrangement would lay the groundwork for one of the most shocking relationships in rock history. As Myra grew older, Jerry Lee's presence shifted from distant cousin to someone who increasingly sought her company, turning up at her school and offering rides home or inviting her out for ice cream. Over time, what had started as playful attention took on a more unsettling tone. Myra later recalled that Jerry Lee's affection evolved beyond what she understood as harmless. He began greeting her with unexpected kisses, blurring the line between innocent fun and something far more serious. Was Jerry Lee's interest in Myra simply misguided affection, or did he see in her a way to anchor his chaotic world? That question lingers even now, adding fuel to the controversy that would define their relationship. For Myra, confusion mounted as she tried to reconcile the cousin she had always known with the man who now seemed determined to draw her into a more adult world. To turn such an important moment into a meaningless memorial by giving Myra a wedding license application with her forged name as its signature. She, not more than 13, was shocked and told him not to dare because of her father, who would really get angry. But Jerry Lee was very obstinate in keeping on saying that they could fight against any opposition to their families. The following day, he earnestly persuaded her to accompany him to the courthouse. From there, they got married by a preacher, without them really knowing well the vows each was saying. Those hurried, stolen wedding arrangements constituted the first steps to what could be events that were sure to change either of their lives. What would you assume Jerry Lee was going through at that moment? Love, defiance, or hopelessness? The emotional fog has never fully cleared for Myra. However, it was also kind of a momentous choice in that day effectively marked the point where her childhood pretty much ended, thus setting the stage for the storm to come in both their lives. What followed next turned a private vow into an international firestorm no one saw coming. A secret that couldn't stay hidden. When Jerry Lee Lewis brought Myra along on his 1958 European tour, it seemed like a minor detail in the midst of his soaring career. However, this decision would soon become the turning point that unraveled his rise to international fame. From the moment they landed at London's Heathrow Airport, the press swarmed Lewis, eager to cover the rock and roll sensation set to take over Elvis Presley's vacant throne. Myra, then only 13, stood quietly in the background, unnoticed at first. But one persistent reporter directed a casual question toward her, asking her identity and reason for accompanying the tour. In her innocence and perhaps naivety, Myra answered honestly, She was Jerry Lee Lewis's wife. That admission, simple as it was, triggered consequences neither could have anticipated. The revelation ignited a media firestorm that dominated headlines across Britain and beyond. Newspapers abandoned major political stories to focus on the shocking marriage between the 22-year-old star and his adolescent cousin. Questions swirled not only about her age, but about their familial ties and Jerry Lee's unresolved prior marriage. The press painted the relationship as a disgraceful betrayal of moral standards. Was the outrage purely about Myra's age, or was the British public also seizing an opportunity to strike at rock music itself? The timing certainly fueled suspicion. Rock and roll was already under attack as a symbol of rebellion and moral decay. Jerry Lee's scandal seemed to give critics exactly the ammunition they had been looking for. The impact on Jerry Lee's career was immediate and devastating. His concerts were met with jeers, and protesters called for his arrest. Promoters and venue owners scrambled to cancel his shows. Within days, the tour that was meant to solidify his stardom collapsed. The couple was forced to leave the country under a cloud of humiliation, their visas revoked. Myra, once invisible to the public eye, now found herself branded with a label that would follow her forever. Could this disaster have been avoided if Myra had deflected that first question? Or was the collapse of Jerry Lee's stardom inevitable, given the secrets he brought across the Atlantic? That moment in London sealed their fate and changed rock history forever. The scandal that shattered a dream. The fallout from the revelation of Jerry Lee Lewis's marriage to 13-year-old Myra Gale Brown was swift and brutal. Practically overnight, Jerry Lee transformed from rock's rising star into an industry outcast. He had been earning as much as $10,000 a night, headlining shows that packed venues and thrilled fans. But after the scandal broke, the bookings dried up almost immediately. Concert promoters canceled shows across the country, radio stations refused to play his records, and fans who once cheered his every move now turned their backs on him. The man once poised to replace Elvis Presley as the king of rock and roll was left scrambling to salvage what was left of his career. Public outrage only deepened as more details surfaced. The media seized on the fact that not only was Myra underage, but she was also Jerry Lee's first cousin once removed, and that he had not yet finalized his divorce from his previous wife when he married Myra. Headlines labeled him a baby snatcher, and worse, turning him into a symbol of moral failure at a time when rock music itself was under attack for corrupting youth. Did the public's fury stem solely from the marriage? Or was Jerry Lee a convenient target in a broader campaign against rock and roll? The timing suggested both. The scandal gave critics of the genre the perfect weapon to discredit the rebellious music that terrified mainstream society. The press coverage was relentless. Every move Jerry Lee and Myra made seemed to feed the frenzy. Rumors swirled about secret affairs, hidden pregnancies, and alleged criminal charges that never materialized. Were these rumors true, or were they sensationalism designed to sell newspapers and crush a rising star? The distinction became blurred as the scandal took on a life of its own. What is certain is that Jerry Lee's career in rock music was effectively destroyed in the United States for years to come. He would eventually pivot to country music, where he found some redemption, but the dream of rock supremacy was gone. In the end, the marriage that was supposed to be a private matter became public spectacle. The scandal didn't just derail Jerry Lee's career, it forever altered how fans and critics viewed both the man and his music, clinging to each other in the eye of the storm. In the face of overwhelming condemnation, Jerry Lee Lewis and Myra chose to cling to each other. For Myra, barely into her teens, Loyalty seemed the only refuge in a world that had turned hostile overnight. She later described how, despite not fully understanding the chaos around them, she felt determined to stand by her husband. The more the public lashed out, the tighter they seemed to hold on. Myra believed that if they could survive the scandal together, they could endure anything. But was that devotion born out of genuine love? Or was it the desperation of two people with no one else left in their corner? Together, Jerry Lee and Myra faced not only the loss of career and reputation, but also real threats to their safety. Reports circulated of death threats, hate mail, and confrontations that made even simple outings dangerous. The couple became virtual outcasts, shunned by neighbors, colleagues, and sometimes even family. Financially, the impact was crushing. With concerts canceled and record sales plummeting, Jerry Lee's once glittering prospects dimmed rapidly. Myra, still a child in so many ways, tried to make sense of a life suddenly defined by fear and uncertainty. How much did the couple's shared sense of being under siege strengthen their bond? And how much did it mask cracks that would later widen? The pair faced criticism and pressure, but presented a united front to the public. Determined to prove their critics wrong, they showed that their marriage was built on love, rather than merely a scandal. Myra declared she was no victim or pawn, and became Jerry Lee's fiercest protector. The image of defiance became their signature, and, somehow, their survival represented some form of redemption, for not just the two of them, but also for their marriage. But did doubts actually invade their sanctuary? Did Myra ever wonder whether standing by Jerry Lee was really a good thing to do? Or had complete survival mode taken over? The very belief that they would outlast the storm would, however, characterize these first years. Love and loyalty would prove to be a weak shelter against the wreckage the couple had already endured. Adversity forged a bond that would be continually tested by the new calamities that would arise. For now, they were each other's, the two outcasts against the world. When tragedy struck at home. The birth of Steve Allen Lewis in 1959 marked a brief moment of joy in an otherwise turbulent chapter of Jerry Lee and Myra's lives. Myra, still a teenager, took pride in becoming a mother, hoping that the arrival of their son might help restore some sense of normalcy. The couple, having weathered public scorn and career collapse, seemed for a short time to find comfort in family life. But behind the scenes, the stress of their circumstances lingered. Jerry Lee's career struggles and the ongoing scrutiny of their marriage added tension to their home, even as they doted on their baby. Some wondered whether the hope placed in family life could truly heal wounds that ran far deeper. That fragile peace was shattered in 1962 by an unimaginable tragedy. While Myra was visiting her mother, their 3-year-old son wandered outside and accidentally drowned in the family pool. The loss devastated Myra, who reportedly collapsed over her son's grave, unable to comprehend how such heartbreak had found her. For Jerry Lee, the grief manifested in anger, confusion, and withdrawal. The couple's already strained relationship now bore the additional weight of sorrow, a burden that neither was fully prepared to face. Could any marriage have survived such a loss, especially one already marked by controversy and struggle? The answer, in their case, became increasingly uncertain. It was after this period that the marriage between Myra and Jerry Lee changed, molding their later years into something else. It soon became the simple enduring of each day, rather than a day's shared defiance from the world. For Myra, buried under a pile of sorrow and somehow not arm's length away from supportive resources, solace was to come in 1963 with the birth of their daughter, Phoebe. But nothing could erase the memory of Steve Allen with the delight of a new child. On the other hand, Jerry Lee seemed even more lost as he turned toward increasingly erratic behavior to escape pain. Or was it the death of their son that increased the emotional distance that was beginning to develop between them? The tragedy initiated a quiet evolution in their marriage. The match that began as passionate and rebellious soon turned into a bare survival within that bond. The grief they shared seemed not to unite them, but to carve out a quiet space where connection became ever more difficult. The storms may have been brutal with public scandal, but within their home, following this loss, one would prove even more devastating. The heartbreak at home was only the beginning. What happened behind closed doors would stun even their closest allies. The marriage behind closed doors. Behind the scenes, the marriage of Jerry Lee Lewis and Myra gradually became defined by volatility, fear, and isolation. Myra, who entered the union as a teenager clinging to hope and loyalty, later revealed that Jerry Lee's temper could be explosive. As his career faltered and personal demons took hold, Jerry Lee reportedly lashed out in violent rages. Arguments escalated into frightening episodes, leaving Myra walking on eggshells to avoid triggering his wrath. She has described how his mood swings kept her in a constant state of anxiety, unsure of what might set him off next. Did his escalating anger stem from grief, guilt, or a deeper unraveling that neither of them fully understood? Compounding the turmoil was Jerry Lee's pattern of infidelity. Myra would come to learn of his affairs, some whispered about on tour, others brazenly conducted close to home. For a woman who had sacrificed so much to stand by him, the betrayal cut deep. Yet she stayed, trying to hold together what little peace she could for their daughter Phoebe. Some wondered whether Jerry Lee's cheating was a desperate attempt to reclaim control over his crumbling world, or simply reckless behavior from a man who believed consequences no longer applied. Myra, meanwhile, struggled in silence, trying to protect her family from the truth of what their life had become. Alcohol and substances only aid the destruction. Myra described in later years exactly how Jerry Lee's drinking made him unpredictable and aggressive. What should have been peaceful nights turned into battlefields where Myra escaped into herself to cope. Was Jerry Lee aware of the damage he was doing, or was he too swallowed by his own chaos to see? Friends and family reportedly advised Myra to go, but she remained for many years, thinking loyalty and love might heal the deepening fractures. The price of that endurance was steep. Her sense of safety eroded, and her identity blurred under the weight of endless turmoil. Nowhere had the price of being the woman behind the legend ever been greater on a private scale than it had been publicly. Myra's life, once defined by those contests that had bound her to the legend, was now wholly a survival exercise. She would eventually admit that her love for Jerry Lee turned to fear as she dealt with the storms of life. Married to a man who, in many ways, had become unrecognizable. The tools of those cracks had only spread farther in their marriage, and soon the point of no return was either that much closer or out of sight. The affair that ended it all. By the late 1960s, the cracks in Jerry Lee Lewis and Myra's marriage had deepened beyond repair. What began as isolated incidents of betrayal became a painful pattern, with Jerry Lee's infidelities no longer hidden or denied. Myra, who had once fiercely defended him to critics and family alike, found herself confronting the final blow, an affair that, in her words, made it impossible to stay. The emotional toll of years of deception, coupled with escalating physical and verbal abuse, left Myra at a crossroads. Did Jerry Lee's reckless behavior stem from a desire to self-destruct, or had he simply stopped caring about the consequences? Whatever the reason, the man Myra once viewed as both husband and partner had become a source of anguish she could no longer endure. The decision to leave was not one Myra took lightly. She had stood by Jerry Lee through scandal, tragedy, and years of public shaming. But the latest betrayal, reportedly involving a woman close to their circle, made her realize that loyalty was no longer enough. Friends and family had long urged her to walk away for her own safety. But Myra needed to reach that point on her own. In interviews, she later admitted that she left not because she stopped loving him, but because she had to save herself. Could any amount of love have justified staying in a situation where dignity and survival were at risk? The divorce decree finalizing the divorce in 1970 represented the end of a union that had once captured the world both positively and negatively. In her divorce petition, Myra alleged infidelity and abuse, and the court documents described a grim picture of life behind the closed doors. Jerry Lee, for his part, seemed to view the separation as inevitable, but he rarely spoke of its emotional impact. Rumors swirled, questioning whether he regretted sending Myra away or whether his pride was just too great to admit. One thing which is obvious is that their split closed a chapter in both their lives in a way neither could have foreseen. Yet in the end, the man whom Myra had once gallantly defended became the reason for her breaking out of that marriage. The affair that finished it all was not only one more act of betrayal, but rather was the last nail to hammer into the coffin of a once-beloved union. For Myra, talking out of the marriage was not a compromise, but rather an act of self-preservation. That final break also marked the moment Myra chose to reclaim control over her future, stepping out from behind Jerry Lee's shadow for the first time in years. No longer willing to endure the cycle of heartbreak and humiliation, she focused on building a life where her worth wasn't tied to someone else's chaos. Though whispers about their marriage would follow her for decades, Myra's departure became a quiet act of defiance, proof that even after years of enduring the unthinkable, it's possible to choose a different path. Did Jerry Lee ever fully grasp what he had lost? Or was Myra's exit simply another casualty of his self-destruction? The truth remains as complicated as their story itself. From child bride to survivor. After walking away from her marriage to Jerry Lee Lewis, Myra Gale Brown faced the daunting task of rebuilding her life from the ashes of scandal. Myra's 32nd birthday marked her departure from the teenage years of growing up amid rock and roll scandal into the newly minted 20s of a woman determined to redeem herself. The transition was far from easy. Myra re-entered school to get an education and find a sense of normalcy that had escaped her for so long. Lacking resources, yet weighed down heavily by public scrutiny, she faced the trials of single motherhood, barely able to find a feasible life for her daughter, Phoebe. Would Myra ever be free of the burden of the words child bride? Or would that chapter always define her before the world? Following her divorce, Myra's agenda included 2 further marriages. Her second, though short-lived, provided lessons with respect to her own needs and boundaries, not easy lessons gained from the first stormy marriage. It was her third marriage that finally afforded Myra the long-sought security and partnership. Publicly, she has expressed how different this union was from the others, emphasizing mutual respect and shared values, as opposed to survival and fear. Was this third marriage the redemption she had hoped for all along, or simply a fresh start made possible by years of resilience and growth? Myra has dedicated her professional life to only paving a new path far removed from the early life frenzy she witnessed. She entered the world of real estate before becoming an author, writing her own account of the infamous years with regard to those events. In this manner, Myra retrieved her voice from a media narrative that had long been defining her as little more than a footnote in Jerry Lee's story. More nuanced portraits of a woman who endured, adapted, and ultimately thrived outside of amazing circumstances are presented in Myra's memoirs and interviews. Fans who once saw her through tabloid headlines were shocked by the depth of her thinking and the strength of her recovery. After all, a life from child bride to survivor serves to epitomize tenacity. She lived her life beyond scandal, that the happenings of youth need not dictate one's future. Could it have been any different? Or was survival in itself the greatest victory? The question will always echo with those receiving her story. In later years, Myra also found purpose in using her experiences to quietly guide others facing public shame or private turmoil. While she never sought the spotlight again, she supported causes centered on resilience, personal growth, and the importance of rewriting one's own story. Through speaking engagements, community work, and personal connections, she became a symbol, however unintended, of how someone can move beyond the label that once threatened to define them. Did she see herself as a role model? Or was she simply determined to live a life of quiet strength? Either way, Myra's journey continues to inspire those who believe that even the most painful beginnings don't have to dictate the final chapter. Looking back without regret. In subsequent years, Myra Gale Brown remarked on her marriage to Jerry Lee Lewis with a striking mixture of clarity and compassion. Many would assume bitterness from a woman who has endured so much: scandal, isolation, betrayal, and fear. Instead, Myra spoke of her past with surprising balance. Yes, their marriage was fundamentally flawed, but she did not play the victim nor cast Jerry Lee as the villain. Their relationship, she said, was from sincere affection, but wrought with immaturity and poor choices. Did they really think love could conquer all the mountains in their way? Myra states that she and Jerry Lee had certainly fallen for each other, but their understanding of the consequences had not yet to have developed. Time somewhat dulled Myra's anger, but her perception of what went wrong became sharper. It was evident to Myra that choices made in the context of extreme age and the atypical dynamics of fame compounded their frailties. Myra has stated that the intensity of their shared defiance against the world was the very thing that initially bound them together, but finally served to isolate them. In interviews, she emphasized that Jerry Lee, for all his failings, was not a monster, but a man struggling under the weight of fame, loss, and his own demons. Was his downfall inevitable given the pressures he faced, or did he have opportunities to choose a different path? Myra left that question open, inviting others to draw their own conclusions. Revenge and vengeance never occupied Myra's thoughts. She could never have the vision to view Jerry Lee in black and white terms. To her, they were just two flawed people stuck in the worst circumstances possible, each trying desperately but unsuccessfully to navigate themselves through it without inflicting too much harm. For that very reason, she thanked her educational system for gifting her with such painful lessons toward strengthening her ability to endure. The past does not hurt Myra, and she can look back at it without regret. But now she has accepted that it is immutable. Did she have any other road of existence to choose from? Possibly. But instead, she focused on the courage to carry on. In conclusion, Myra's reflections culminate with a woman who has not gained peace for herself by becoming free of the past, but has absorbed it into her life. That tabloid story became her story, Now an intricate story of love, loss, and survival. In telling that story, she offered her fans an unvarnished glimpse of the price of fame and youthful rebellion. Just when you think you've heard it all, the lasting mark of Myra's story proves impossible to outrun. The legacy that won't fade. Decades after the scandal that defined her early life, Myra Gale Brown remains, in the eyes of many, Jerry Lee Lewis's child bride, a label she has never been able to fully escape. Though she rebuilt her life, pursued new paths, and found lasting love, the shadow of that marriage lingers. Every interview, every appearance seems to circle back to the story the world can't forget: the teenage girl who married her famous cousin. Myra has often acknowledged that this label shaped the way people viewed her, both limiting and defining her identity. Could the public ever truly see beyond that single chapter of her life? Or was her legacy forever linked to that moment in rock and roll history? Over time, Myra chose to take control of her narrative. Through books, public speaking, and candid interviews, she shared her version of events, challenging myths and correcting exaggerations. Her memoir offered a detailed account of her experiences, giving fans and critics alike a glimpse into the complexities behind the headlines. Far from simply reliving old scandals, Myra used her platform to advocate for honesty, resilience, and the importance of learning from the past. Her voice, once overshadowed by tabloid sensationalism, became a powerful tool for reclaiming her story. Did she succeed in reshaping how history remembers her? Or do the old narratives still hold sway in popular memory? And here is Myra speaking today, calm and settled with purpose, while taking us through her journey. She does not run away from feeling those early years of pain, because these pains are part of the roots that brought strength into her life. She is proud of how she stood up to the tempest that promised to engulf her whole life at one point in her life. The revelations made by her, which her fans have listened to for a long time about the marriage, the scandals, and the crumbling toll these things have had on her, have left them dumbfounded, not by its sensationalism, but by its words' quality of honesty and dignity behind them. Would it have ever been imagined, in those days of headlines and jeers, that she could emerge thus? Myra's final chapter was not about the marriage that rocked the world, but about the woman who lived through it and rose above it. She is a testament to the reclamation and reconstruction of identity, even if history seeks to box a person into a singular, scandalous moment. For those who can listen, Myra speaks of survival and courage, and the importance of paying attention to one's truth. If this story left you speechless, let us know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss our next deep dive. And before you go, check out the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.